Hello and welcome to Working Wise, a podcast created and produced by K&L Gates. Each episode is designed to provide labor and employment updates and compliance tips to lawyers and HR professionals. We hope you enjoy this podcast.
My name is Leann Walsh, and I'm a partner in the firm's Raleigh office. I practice both in the firm's labor, employment, and workplace safety and healthcare practice areas.
Hi, I'm Desiree Moore. I'm a partner in the Chicago office of K&L Gates, and I co-lead our digital crisis planning and response practice group.
Hi, my name is Leah Baucom. I am a partner in the Charlotte office in the general corporate and M&A group.
With the increased spread and impact of COVID-19, employers are changing the way their businesses operate, and we see this daily in the work that we do. While some businesses have drastically slowed or stopped operating altogether, other industries, and healthcare and pharmaceutical industries are good examples, those industries are seeing an increased demand for operations and services across the board. In some circumstances, it may be necessary to have employees remain at work for longer periods of time, even overnight, to accommodate the increased demand. But these kinds of business decisions have to be made with consideration toward wage and hour requirements, workplace safety, discrimination, and proper social distancing, among other things. And so in this podcast, we wanted to address these topics in the context of COVID-19 alongside this notion of employees remaining at work for longer periods of time in order to address demand.
First, on the employment front, employers must keep their requirements of federal law in mind. The Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA, sets federal wage and hour requirements for the workforce. For shifts of fewer than 24 hours, the FLSA requires employers to be paid for all hours worked. For shifts of 24 hours or more, the FLSA permits employers to exclude sleep time from hours worked if three things are true. One, the employee be provided with adequate sleeping facilities, which does not need to be private. Two, where the employee can usually enjoy an uninterrupted night's sleep, defined as of at least 5 consecutive hours of sleep. And three, the parties have an expressed or implied agreement to exclude the sleep time. It is important to keep in mind that errors in scheduling or shift scheduling under the FLSA, for example, not providing employees with the necessary breaks or sleeping time, risks employers owing the entire 24 hours. States may have additional wage and hour requirements. Second, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, requires employers to provide their employees with a workplace free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. OSHA advises that extended or unusual work shifts may be more stressful physically, mentally, and emotionally. Non-traditional shifts and extended work hours may disrupt the body's regular schedule, leading to increased fatigue, stress, and lack of concentration. These effects lead to an increased risk of operator error, injuries, and accidents. As such, employers should understand that there is great risk to employees if employees are being requested to increase their hours or work overnight. If a worker is new to a night shift, it can take up to 10 days for that worker to adjust to the new schedule. OSHA encourages employers to provide adequate staffing so night shift workers can take breaks and relax during their shift. Third, employers must also remain mindful of equal employment opportunity and be careful when choosing who makes up the increased hour or overnight workforce. The decision should not be based on any traits protected by federal, state, or local law, such as gender, age, disability, or national origin. This is the case even where a certain population may have an increased risk of contracting COVID-19. Employees that are pregnant, 65 or older, or may have an immunocompromising condition cannot be automatically excluded from the workplace. Instead, employers should create a clear and legitimate business reason for identifying which group of employees will be required to have increased hours or be required to stay overnight. In the alternative, employees with certain conditions may require an accommodation to perform overnight or extended shift work. Businesses should have a plan to address concerns of employees with disabilities or who have other medical requirements. For example, should there be a carve-out for employees with medical reasons for needing to sleep at home, such as people with sleep apnea who require CPAP machines to sleep? Employers should also consider taking additional measures to prevent harassment under the circumstances. Fourth, it is worth remembering that emergency responders, healthcare workers, and others providing essential services to the community have been especially stretched thin, working longer hours than usual, working more shifts, or even overnight. Particularly because of these employees' extensive and close contacts with vulnerable or infected individuals in healthcare settings, ensuring proper and adequate safety measures are in place and that necessary PPE are available are a must. Healthcare facilities, along with healthcare coalitions, local and state health departments, and local and state partners, should work together to develop strategies that identify and extend PPE supplies so that recommended PPE will be available when needed most. When using PPE optimization strategies, training on PPE use, including proper donning and doffing procedures, must be provided to healthcare personnel before they can carry out patient care activities. Ensure there is a secure and sanitized space for employees to store PPE if intended for reuse, and this includes for extended shifts and those working overnight and taking rest breaks. Lastly, employers must engage in COVID-19 transmission-specific planning. Businesses should respond in a flexible way to varying levels of disease transmission in their business community and their workforces, and be prepared to refine their business response plans as needed. This will help reduce transmission among employees, maintain healthy business operations, and maintain a healthy work environment. For example, employers should address social distancing in the work environment. While FLSA regulations do not require private sleeping quarters, private sleeping or bathing quarters should be considered in this situation. Make sure bathrooms are continuously stocked with soap and paper towels or automated hand dryers. Hand sanitizer could also be made available. In light of the social distancing guidelines, employers should determine how many employees can safely stay in the facility at one time. Consider things like, where will they be located in relation to one another? Will there be adequate personnel to enable workers to take breaks, eat meals, relax, and sleep? How will requests by family members to visit be handled? Is there sufficient space in the break and rest areas to accommodate social distancing? Do certain areas need to be closed off to prevent use? Consider implementing traffic flow indicators, for example, marking 6 feet apart in elevators, hallways, etc., or one-way hallways where possible to minimize close contact. If scheduling allows, stagger meal and break times and form small groups that regularly conduct those activities at the same time and do not mix. There should also be a plan for increased cleaning of the facilities, including spaces where employees are eating, sleeping, and showering. Routine cleaning is the everyday cleaning practices that businesses and communities normally use to maintain a healthy environment. Employers should ensure CDC guidelines are followed regarding the cleaning and disinfecting of different surfaces. For example, fabric must be cleaned differently than hard, porous surfaces. Surfaces frequently touched by multiple people, such as door handles, bathroom surfaces, and handrails, should be cleaned with soap and water or another detergent at least daily when facilities are in use. More frequent cleaning and disinfection may be required based on level of use. Each business must also have a plan in place in the event an on-site employee falls ill at the facility. Will the company close the entire facility for cleaning? Can the workplace be isolated to close only a portion where the infected employee was? If one of the employees sleeping at the facility tests positive for COVID-19 or has a suspected COVID-19 case, then other workers in the facility may be considered close contacts and may need to be put in self-isolation. Does the company have a plan if all of the workers are sent home? Considering grouping employees to work together in set groups to avoid risking exposure across multiple shifts so that employees are working with the same employees every day.
Thank you, Leann. This is Leah from the corporate group. In addition to the legal employment-based considerations of increasing work hours of your employees, we did also want to touch on a couple of the practical considerations that will hopefully boost morale during this difficult time. As you've all seen from the news, many employers are offering employees cash bonuses or wage increases from working through the COVID-19 pandemic. If you do this, we encourage employers to avoid using the term hazard pay, as that can create not only a negative connotation, but also may indicate that employees are at an increased risk. However, while additional cash payments have obvious boosts to morale, we'd like to suggest some of the smaller steps that you can take to increase morale. Some of these suggestions are based on our own personal experiences, and as attorneys, we can all personally attest to the fact that little touches can go a very long way in terms of boosting morale and dedication to work. The first recommendation we have is very simple. It's to ensure that the facilities you provide for work is cleaned regularly and, in the best case scenario, more often than usual. And of course, communicate the measures that you are taking to ensure that your employees are safe and protected. Providing access to hand sanitizer, face masks, gloves to your employees, even if the work that's being performed does not typically require such gear, is one of the easiest ways to show your employees that you as an employer care for them and that you're making an effort to indicate that you are taking the risk seriously. The second recommendation we would make is very near and dear to my own personal heart. is to consider providing free food and caffeinated beverages. A workforce that has consistent and free access to coffee, sodas, energy drinks, and snacks is a completely different workforce than one that is required to buy their own food and beverages, especially when many restaurants and coffee stores may no longer be open or are operating with some sort of restrictions. If you are requiring your employees to stay overnight, a hot breakfast also does wonders for morale. The difference between a stale, prepackaged cold muffin and warm eggs, toast, and bacon can set the tone for a productive or an unproductive morning. Of course, this must all be balanced against the contamination risk. During this period, it is important to not create scenarios where employees must share dishes, drinking glasses, cups, or eating utensils. We would suggest that you consider removing communal items like salt shakers, coffee creamers, and the like. And of course, please encourage all of your employees to wash their hands after handling food. We would also note that during this pandemic, many restaurants are offering delivery or takeout options and would be more than happy to enter into a consistent arrangement to provide individualized boxed breakfasts, lunches, and dinners to employees. And in terms of providing food and beverages, we do also want to add a couple of personal tips, not necessarily based off of scientific evidence, but just based off of personal experiences. One is sugary snacks are craved by all people, but certainly by people who have worked more than 12 hours that day. Number two is that after a certain amount of time, iced water will actually keep you more alert than coffee. So considering providing access to ice cubes is a simple and effective way to keep your workforce alert. Number three is providing access to a couple of healthier options like apples or citrus fruits. There are some studies that have shown that the smell of apples and citrus fruits actually keeps one more alert than coffee. But with all of that, I would add a number four and very important point, which is that at the end of the day, coffee is king. Please provide access to coffee. If you do opt to provide food and beverage options to your employees, we would like to note that all non-disposable food service items should be handled with gloves and should be washed regularly with dish soap or hot water or in a dishwasher. The third recommendation we would make is to provide access to an outdoor area, as it would be likely to be appreciated by a workforce that is required to stay inside most of the day. While this may be tricky, if there are outside areas surrounding your office, you can consider making a space where employees can take a walk or enjoy a break under the sun, or at least to encourage them to leave the office at a certain point for a quick stroll. Keep in mind, if an employee is granted access to any outdoor area or is likely to go outside the office at night, consider hiring extra overnight security, and to ensure that even in the outdoor spaces, social distancing guidelines are followed.
Thanks so much, Leah, and thanks, Leann, as well. This is Desiree again. As it concerns kind of everything that Leah and Leann have shared, both practical advice, legal guidance, these are critical, and they intersect with the work that I focus on, which is communication strategy and planning, including crisis communications should the need arise. And so all of these great tips really segue into, how we talk about what we're doing in a public-facing way or internally with employees. And each of those things should be strategically prepared so as to navigate legal implications and also kind of avoid some of the kind of fallout that we see when companies are not as diligent about their communications. So, in our view, it is advisable and wise for every organization to put plans in place for both internal communications and external communications as needed when we're dealing with precarious circumstances or uncertain times, as we've seen, in the wake of COVID-19. And so an easy example is if there's a COVID outbreak, we should be prepared in advance as to how we are going to speak about this, both internally and externally. And depending on the industry that you're in, this may be regulated. There may be things that you have to say and individuals that you have to notify. And so, all the more reason to prepare your statements in advance in accordance with local, state, and federal guidance, best practices, and rules and regulations, so that in the event that something does occur, we don't waste any time. The statement is prepared and we issue it with some tweaks depending on the circumstances. But we should also be prepared in times of crisis or in times of distraction. The work that I do goes up and increases exponentially, in part because companies are distracted or energy, efforts, and resources are diverted. And so we see crises of all sorts arise sort of in conjunction or in parallel with, existing or known crises. And so whether it's misconduct in the workplace, an incident at the C-suite or board level, or some other unanticipated crisis such as a data breach, which we've seen data breaches increase in the wake of COVID, we should be prepared in advance for not only how we will respond in accordance with our legal obligations, but also what we will say internally and externally. So what we typically do with clients is work to prepare holding statements that you literally hold and don't release in anticipation of a crisis, but that you can issue without delay if a crisis hits. Employees should also be kept informed in real time as to key updates and developments that concern them, particularly in light of COVID-19. There's so much uncertainty. Employees are concerned. We can address those concerns in real time, and in a sense, in advance. We can preempt employees from coming back to us and asking questions or making inquiries if we keep that steady stream of communication, again, that's vetted by counsel, so we aren't running afoul of what we can and cannot say, but we are keeping our employees informed. And, in this regard, it's helpful to work with legal counsel to determine what your obligations may be depending on your industry, depending on the kind of work that you do, whether you're a public company or privately held, whether you're in the healthcare space or otherwise. And that way your messaging, whether it's by email to your employees or maybe a microsite that you've set up for, important COVID developments or otherwise, are up to date and informative for your employees. And, whatever the avenue, and this is a tip to keep in mind for all sorts of communications, as an employer, you should anticipate that the content will be leaked. It may not be, but if we anticipate that it will be leaked, we are drafting it in a way so that it is appropriate for larger public consumption, even if that's not the intended audience. And we do that by reflecting core values and saying things that we believe, one, are true and are foundational to the company, but also that we believe will further bolster our position in the public eye, even if, again, it wasn't originally intended for public consumption. Sort of in the same vein, in order to avoid a lot of the crises that we see that take the form of sort of employee grievances on social media and other digital platforms, we recommend that our clients make efforts to ensure that employees have avenues for airing grievances and that they feel heard and able to communicate concerns to supervisors or other management. So encourage employee feedback and suggestions on how to create a more comfortable, functioning workspace during, COVID-19. And with respect to kind of all of the helpful tips and some of the things that Leah was describing about, coffee and snacks and outdoor spaces, solicit those kinds of tips. Sometimes your employees who are kind of on the ground, whether it's in a manufacturing plant or otherwise, they can tell you, oh, if the space was configured this way, it might be a little bit more comfortable, or if we had this accommodation, of course, within reason. But opening that dialogue and allowing for a dialogue helps minimize chances of an employee airing those types of grievances publicly in a way that is then kind of, outside of our control and kind of outside of that internal dialogue that we can, more helpfully guide and steer. So allow for various avenues of employee grievances, comments, questions, complaints, including, we find this helpful, anonymous pathways, and then actively monitor social media and other digital spaces for potential information that's being disseminated about the company, and specifically, as it concerns, this topic, the increased hours that employees may be working, the accommodations and other workplace issues that they might be identifying. So we want to both allow for grievances internally, but then also be proactive about searching for dialogue that may be occurring in the digital space on social media platforms and otherwise about the company, so that we can glean information and also hopefully address those concerns. I think the best approach, of course, is to be proactive and not reactive to worker concerns and questions and dissatisfaction. And this often, we find, almost as a rule, helps avoid larger crises down the line. And actually, just a quick note to circle back on, because I mentioned monitoring social media, which is something you can work with legal counsel to do. But to the extent you're seeing employees commenting on social media about the conditions of their workplace or about the increased hours, this is not something you can prevent or prohibit employees from doing. And so I wanted to be clear about that. And of course, legal counsel can help you create social media policies that are permissible, but you can't, as a rule, say, employees cannot post on social media. That's not permissible and would be in violation of federal law, among other things. So I wanted to clarify that. But allowing for that open dialogue, we find, certainly does help. And then being proactive about both the digital narrative about your company and how we're communicating internally in the company and externally is very helpful.
Thanks, Desiree. That concludes our summary of important considerations for businesses using extended or overnight shifts for their employees during this unprecedented time. We hope you enjoyed this episode of K&L Gates Working Wise podcast series. Many more episodes in our series, as well as our COVID-19 related materials, can be found at klgateshub.com. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks again for listening to Working Wise. New episodes are available for download through iTunes, Google Play, and other podcast applications. If you have any topics you would like to hear about on the next Working Wise podcast, please send them to workingwise@klgates.com.